Okay, this video is predictions for 2023, and I'm kind of just winging it here with some thoughts that I hope will be helpful to everybody and where things are going. Basically, I think it pretty much comes down to this painting right here. This is the painting by Michelangelo from 1512 called The Creation of Adam. And the idea is basically it comes from the Bible, the concept that man is created in the image of God. Therefore, as God is a creator and man is created in his image, man too can be a creator. That he is part animal. Certainly we have a lot of things in common with animals, but we also have things in common with God as far as we can understand God. And we can talk, we can think, and we should try to nurture the divine side of ourselves, if you will. And by being created in the image of God, that means that man is a partly divine creature and therefore entitled to natural rights, to freedom, to be, given his privacy, his property, his peace. So some of these predictions for 2023, I really think it comes down to, in the United States, is America going to continue to have biblical ethics where we believe that man is created in the image of God, or are we going to transition to atheistic Darwinism? Those are the two competing paradigms. Yeah, I know some people like Buddhism. There's plenty of other religions and cultures and all that. That's wonderful. But a society basically has a fundamental agreement. Is Christmas going to continue to be Christmas, or is Christmas just going to be, winter holiday or happy holidays or something like that? And we're on the path pretty strongly to atheistic Darwinism. Atheistic Darwinism is what is enforced as standard policy in the American universities. And most people think it's no big deal. They're ahistorical ignoramuses, don't know what's going on. But this is really a big deal. We're progressively being culturally disenfranchised, isolated, impoverished, dehumanized, put under more centralized control. The border is being opened up. And if you have an open border, then you're basically combined with another country. So we're basically becoming combined with Mexico, a very poor country. We're also being combined with Canada, also a rather poor country where there's not a lot of freedom. Okay, and so that means United States, based on that, plus a lot of other things, is going to become much more poor and much less free. Atheism leads to socialism. Everywhere it's been tried, socialism is a disaster, causes terrible poverty. It fails miserably everywhere. And then it leads quite often to fascism. America is sort of in fascism right now, where there's corporations pretty much control the country. And that too is failing. The economy is getting worse and worse. America was a rich country back in the 1970s. I mean, I lived through it. I saw it. Women didn't need to work. Hardly any worked. In all the places I was, they hardly ever worked, Okay, anyways, the only economic system that works is laissez-faire capitalism. That's not rigged. That gives everybody a chance to work, that wants to work, and to be rewarded for their efforts. That's the only thing that works. All the other economic systems, they don't work. You can study this for yourself. I'm no economist, but I've studied it enough. Read Ayn Rand, her book Atlas Shrugged. It's a masterpiece, one of the greatest novels ever written. It's pretty obvious. Look at the great economists, the University of Chicago Club, come from like the 1960s and stuff. Anybody who studies economics knows that that's true, okay? Every group in American society now is a victim group. All the women, all the minorities, all LGBT, everybody's a minority group except Caucasian heterosexual Christian men. They're being scapegoated. They're being blamed for all the problems of society. They're certainly not perfect. They got their problems, but they're being blamed for everything. And what's happening is they're targeted like a scapegoat, like the kulaks were in Russia in the 1920s and 1930s, and like other countries have done when they scapegoat a group. Because scapegoating a group is a mechanism to push the blame somewhere. And I think it's also because that's the group that tends to speak up the most for freedom. If you go to the other internet video-based websites, you will see there's a lot of them speaking up about wanting freedom. Okay, and I think once they're out of the way, Caucasian heterosexual Christian men, they were the dominant group in America for hundreds of years. And once they're excluded from society, which seems to be the plan right now, who's going to maintain Christian ethics in America? I don't know. I don't see any other group that's doing it in big numbers in a significant way. I see some people doing wonderful things, but there are just not that many of them. Dinesh D'Souza, the guy's a genius. He's a heroic, brilliant, genius individual, but he's just one guy. Caucasian heterosexual Christian men, they're fading out of society pretty fast and being pushed out of everything. And a lot of it, is kind of ridiculous. For example, look at myself. My mother's from Puerto Rico. Am I a poor victim minority like my mother? My mother was so poor. She grew up in a barn, okay, like an animal. Not with 10 cents did her family have because the father left them, okay? But she and her family managed to, get educated and do okay. So am I just a poor, helpless minority? Do I need affirmative action? No, I graduated first in my class, okay? Or am I like my dad? Am I a white privilege? I mean, give me a fucking break. My dad's from Ireland, okay? My grandfather was shot by the British. My great uncle was shot by the British. Luckily, they survived, but it took them a while to recover. The British were awful to the Irish. My father had to leave Ireland just because there were no jobs. He didn't want to come to the United States. He couldn't get a job in Ireland. The economy over there is terrible. So, man, when you've lived under British rule, people from India know what I'm talking about. The British were not nice to a lot of their subjects. So when Christianity is gone, where is our moral philosophy going to come from? What a lot of people don't realize is a society has a moral philosophy that usually comes from religion, and that determines how people behave and how they treat each other. And even if you think Christianity is bad or a joke or whatever, it does have ethics where people are supposed to love thy neighbor, treat them as you would wish to be treated, forgive and get on with life. Okay, those are good ethics to help people get along. Christianity, yeah, I don't like the Pope. I think he stinks. I think most Catholic priests are lightweights, and I'm not a big fan of them, but there's tons of great things about the church for a society. It can have lots of problems. It can accept anybody. It doesn't care what other groups people come from, what religions they come from, or ethnic backgrounds. They can all find a happy place in a society that's Christian. That's one of the great things about it. That's why the United States has been a melting pot all these years, because people want to come here, because it produces wealth, it produces freedom, it produces, the American dream, the opportunity to improve one's lot in life. There's hope, and that's a good thing. Atheistic Darwinism, which is promoted in all the universities, it is not the same thing as Christianity. It says that humans are just talking primates, talking monkeys, that they do not have a soul, that they are not created in the image of God. And because they are not created in the image of God, there is nothing divine about them, and therefore they have zero rights. That's an important point. Zero rights. You can forget about the right to a family, the right to property, the right to money, the right to anything. Basically, the citizens are subjects, and they're like farm animals. In a godless society, whoever the ruler is, they become the equivalent of God. You can see historically that this is how it has always been. There's no mystery here. Read about ancient Rome, okay? It's pretty obvious, all right? History shows that rulers, they like this view, and then when they have this view, they see their subjects, and it's subjects. It's not citizens, subjects. It's just like livestock, farm animals, slaves. A farmer doesn't allow his cattle or chickens to have family. The farmer will do whatever is profitable. The social engineering means no more traditional families, okay? The slave owners, they would take advantage of slave women. They would do all kinds of things. That's what we're headed towards, okay? In the modern world, communism is just, a euphemism for slavery. That's what it is, modern slavery, okay? Atheistic Darwinism is essentially the modern step to communism, all right? They go together. Anybody who studied, the history of Russia, China, etc. in the 1900s, it's pretty obvious. Okay, what did Russia do? Russia destroyed all the churches, about 48,000. They would shoot all the priests. The young nuns raped, the old nuns shot. It's brutal. Read about what happened in Spain with Franco. Okay, let's say in around the 1930s. All right, it was terrible what happened. Okay, and look what they did. They just shot all these priests, destroyed their churches. Communism does not allow Christianity to exist. Okay, not in any real form. And doesn't even want any Christians to exist. Okay, anybody who speaks up for freedom, in the future, they'll lose their social credit score, like in China, or they'll be killed. Stalin killed 65 million of his own citizens. Okay, Mao killed over 100 million. Hitler and Pol Pot, they killed many millions while they had their chance. Okay, the worshippers get sent to terrible cold place, like the Russians would get sent to Siberia. I think Americans will be sent to a terrible cold place in the future, like Canada. So, amongst the people who actually know me really well, and my family and whatnot, I kind of have the nickname of Steinchick, which is meant as a teasing insult. Basically, he was a Polish court jester, a little bit short. I'm 5'9", so I'm not that short, but there's a lot of tall people in my family. And basically, everybody was celebrating at a party. This is in Poland, and they're all happy Where Steinchick, he reads the newspaper too much and he sees that Poland just lost in an area called Smolensk, another town. So he's a little bit, brooding. He's sort of socially awkward a little bit. Anyways, I just can't help thinking about all these things. I've read tons and tons of history and religion and stuff, and I've seen societal, turnovers and stuff. I read all about Rome and all these other places like Greece, the Renaissance, and a whole bunch of other, the Enlightenment history and what happened in France in the 1700s. And sadly, we are headed down this path. You could just read about the history of the 1900s, and you will see these things in America, other than the modern computers and things that go with that and electronics, the other stuff's all pretty much the same. Here's a quote by Malcolm Muggeridge. He's a guy who was from England in the 1900s, and he was a TV news guy, and he was originally an atheist, but he went in to visit Russia, and he saw what an awful disaster it was, how it was just like a crime against humanity. It was so terrible how Stalin, just brutalized all the citizens and show trials and killed them and stuff in the concentration camps. And so he changed his tune. Okay, and here's what he saw happening in the West, like in England and in America. And this is Malcolm Muggeridge's quote here from his book, Vintage Muggeridge, Religion and Society. Education is the great mumbo-jumbo and fraud of the age. It purports to equip us to live, and it is prescribed as a universal remedy for everything, from juvenile delinquency to premature senility. For the most part, so-called education, it only serves to enlarge stupidity, inflate conceit, enhance credulity, and put those subjected to it at the mercy of brainwashers with printing presses, radio, and television at their disposal. It has been said that when human beings stop believing in God, they believe in nothing. But it's much worse than that. The truth is, they will believe in anything. So the final conclusion of Western society is surely that whereas other civilizations have been brought down by attacks from barbarians from outside, our Western civilization had the unique distinction of training its own destroyers at its own educational institutions and providing them with facilities for propagating their destructive ideology far and wide, all at the public expense. Thus did Western man decide to abolish himself, creating his own boredom out of his own affluence, his own vulnerability out of his own strength, his own impotence out of his own erotomania, himself blowing the trumpet that brought the walls of his own city tumbling down. And having convinced himself that he was too numerous, he labored with pill and scalpel to make himself fewer, until at last, having educated himself into imbecility and polluted and drugged himself into stupefaction, he keeled over, a weary, battered old brontosaurus, and became extinct. So that last line again, until at last, having educated himself into imbecility and polluted and drugged himself into stupefaction, he kneeled over, a weary, battered old brontosaurus, and became extinct. Okay, here's a quote or two from the Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 17, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Okay, here's a quote from Ben Stein. Ben Stein's a brilliant guy. He made a movie about evolution and how evolution, the way it's taught in schools, is largely a fraud. So here's his quote. Love of God and compassion and empathy leads you to a glorious place. Science without God leads you to killing people. And I'm sorry to say it, but I've got a lot of experience in science. And if you don't have a religious foundation for performing science, it leads to bad things. You can say, oh, you don't need any type of God or anything with science. Actually, you do. Look at Harvard these days. Look at all the medications and pills they're given to pediatric patients that have been proven long-term not to work. So they're giving drugs to kids that they know don't work so they can get money. Okay? That's pretty bad when our so-called leading academic institutions are misleading the doctors to prescribe drugs they know long-term don't work well to kids. Okay? These psychiatric medicines are bogus. Okay? Long-term. In general, most of the time. Here's a quote from Joseph Stalin. He lived from 1879 to 1953. He said, "The Communist Party cannot be neutral toward religion. The Communist Party stands for science, and all religion is opposed to science." Now, that's obviously completely untrue. The greatest scientist who ever lived, Isaac Newton, was also one of the most religious men who lived. Take a look at James Tour for a modern scientist who's hyper-religious. Religion helps energize people so they're capable of doing better science. It helps guide their values so that they focus on doing things that really help people, not just trying to win the lottery, making a new drug that can get marketed even though it doesn't work, okay? Okay, here's Nikita Khrushchev. He was the leader of Soviet Russia like in the 1950s, early 1960s, and here's what he said. "We have no use for the policy of the Gospels. If someone slaps you, to just turn the other cheek. No, we had shown that anyone who slapped us on our cheek would get his head kicked off." And so I just tell you, is these the kind of people you want running your show? Stalin and Khrushchev, they're so brutal. What kind of a society are you going to have with Stalin and Khrushchev running the show? Brutal, okay? Here's a quote from Matthew. This is from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 12, verses 25 to 27. "If a kingdom is divided against itself, it cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, it cannot stand. No one can enter a strong man's house to steal his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can plunder his house." That's worth repeating. No one can enter a strong man's house to steal his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can plunder his house. Okay, so talking about tying up the strong man of American society, America traditionally has been a very macho, masculine place. Just read through history, okay? Just look at Hollywood in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, okay? Sylvester Stallone with the Rambo movies, with the Rocky movies, the Charlton Heston, Clint Eastwood. These were typical things we all watched. I watched all that stuff growing up. Chuck Connors, I loved all that stuff, okay? And it was cool to be an athlete and cool to be, a wrestler, a football player, all that stuff. Nowadays, more and more schools are dropping male sports, or, more and more colleges, they're dropping wrestling. The tap water is full of estrogen chemicals, from birth control pills, ethynyl estradiol, to plastics like bisphenol A and phthalates, and other estrogenic chemicals. A lot of atrazine, for example, the herbicide. And so what's happening is the American population is being overloaded with estrogen, and it's in tons of preservatives. The milk nowadays has got tons of estrogen in it, and to some extent, men are being feminized, and feminizing men makes them easier to control. So I know the church has got lots of things about it that are a pain in the ass for a lot of people, but it does provide good ethics. It does provide a moral foundation. As Voltaire said, "I want my doctor to believe in God so that he will not rob me." Okay, a society, nobody's going to be perfect. Mankind is never perfect. And you can say, well, there's a lot of Christians that are jerks, and Christian ethics doesn't necessarily make people be good. That is all true. However, they tend to be much better with Christian ethics than they are without it. And Christian ethics can include all other cultures. It's not like it's exclusive at all. Christianity is like the least exclusive thing on the planet. Everybody's welcome to sharing it in some way. And the big thing I'm talking about is societal Christian ethics. I'm not talking about going to church or praying or reading. That's a different thing, okay? Yeah, do I respect that? Yes, I do. But I don't. But the great thing about Christianity is it's not exclusive. Anybody can, participate in anything Christian. It's not an exclusive thing. It lets everybody in. You want to talk about tolerant. It's as tolerant as it gets. And look at all this beautiful art it produces. The Descent from the Cross by Rogier van der Weyden from 1435. How incredible is that painting? Look at this, Michelangelo's Pietà. And Michelangelo, his mother died when he was very young, about 6 or 7 years of age. And so he longed for his mother. He loved his mother. He missed his mother. And so the Pietà that he made in the early 1500s, in a sense, Mary here is really like his mother, and she's bigger than Jesus in part so she can hold him on her lap. But that's his mother. And this is the greatest sculpture. He gave everything he had. This is the greatest sculpture of all time. And it's like a miracle how great that sculpture is. And Christianity energizes people to do more than they could without it. I've seen that when I studied all these great writers and artists. Talk about energizing people. It gives them a worldview that says the universe is knowable, it's rational, it's created by a rational God, and therefore we can potentially learn about it. The churches, they're just spectacular examples of architecture. They're beautiful. They're the most beautiful buildings in the world. There's nothing even close. And all these traditions, like the traditions of Western civilization, how magnificent ancient Greece was in a time when the world was mostly tyrannical, with very little freedom or sophisticated achievement. The ancient Greeks made all these incredible architectural buildings. They started theater and philosophy and did a whole bunch of other good things, okay? Most of the world at that time had very tyrannical rulers, and that prevented them from being as creative as they would have liked. Look at Egypt. They were forced to build pyramids and write in hieroglyphics. They wouldn't let their art, progress. Like it progressed quite a bit in Greece. Look at the Greek statues. And here's sort of one of the apexes of civilization, the painting school of Athens by Raphael from 1511, celebrating the great Greek philosophers and scientists. And it's really in the background of Roman architecture. And it's in the Vatican, indicating again here that the Christian church totally welcomed all this knowledge and thinking. And I think St. Thomas Aquinas had really paved the way for the syncretic nature of Christianity, whereby it can absorb other traditions and thought systems and get along with them and work together in a positive way. Here's Aristotle pointing to the ground, saying, let's be practical, think about nature and reality, and Plato pointing to above, look at the perfect forms and all his ideas. Okay, this little used as being like United States. Thomas Cole was like one of the greatest landscape painter who ever lived, one of the top three certainly. And here's an old American homestead. Okay, and here's the big guy who helped get us free from England. England was not very nice to a lot of the countries that it ruled. Okay, here is Thomas Cole's painting of an architect's vision. And there were great architects in the 1800s and 1900s, and they made all these spectacular buildings in the United States. And here's basically, where we were at for a long time. And this certainly was the case in the 1970s and 1980s. America was spectacular. And I remember growing up, in the 1970s and 80s, there was no doubt in our minds. America was the best country in the world. Not by a little bit, by far. There was no country comparable to us. We had this idea, America is the best, you would say, crap from a lot of these other places. And don't get me wrong, every place has its strength and weakness. But what I'm trying to say is we loved America, and we felt it was the richest, most free, wonderful country in the whole world. And this is how America sort of saw itself in the past. Whereas now, these are all a series of paintings called The Course of Empire by Thomas Cole. And it's sort of based on the philosophy of Vico when he talks about the cycle of empires. And here's sort of where America's now. It's deteriorating. There's loss of freedom. There's more crime. It's very sad. But it doesn't have to be this way. We could potentially make it good again. It's sad. America doesn't have to be poor and all messed up. America could be wealthy again. It could be more free. It could be more happy. I hope America will restore itself. And you need Christian ethics. You don't need everybody to be Christian. Everybody can be whatever they want. But the Christian ethics, they work for a big scale society. So people are nice to each other. We need that. And then here's sort of what this leads to. This is like Russia, kind of a third world shithole. People don't understand how poor and screwed up Russia is. I've known people who live there, okay? It's bad. There's a reason why everybody flees Russia in the 1900s, okay? We don't want to end up like that. And another thing, Plato was very sad because in 399 BC, Athens, condemned Socrates to death, and he was probably the greatest man in the whole city. And so, unfortunately, there's a tendency in our modern society to start doing that sort of thing. If somebody's outspoken, telling the truth, they get condemned or, blocked, canceled, or whatever, or worse. And that's not simple good for society when, its wise, experienced men are not allowed to talk. So, anyways, this is a beautiful painting by Jacques-Louis David in 1787. He was an incredible artist, that guy, Jacques-Louis. Okay, here's another magnificent painting. It's from the last days of Pompeii after Mount Vesuvius erupted there. But I love this painting because I don't care if that's the official name of it, Last Days of Pompeii. It really reminds me of the fall of Troy and Aeneas carrying his father Anchises out of Troy. And it totally reminds me of that. It's a magnificent painting. And here's the funny thing, too. This was made by Karl Bryullov. It's hard for me to pronounce it. In 1830, the Russian artist. This is perhaps the greatest painting ever made by a Russian artist. And that's what I'm saying. In the 1800s, even though they had a lot of serfdom, majority of people in Russia were serfs in the 1800s, as many as like over 80%. But they still, with their aristocrats they had and their Christian ethics, they still were capable. This is a magnificent painting. It's one of the top, 30 paintings of all time in the history of the world. It's magnificent. Okay, so that's what Russia was capable of doing, whereas in the 1900s, Russia was a crap hole. Didn't do anything good in the arts, except, Gulag Archipelago and Brother Boris, Dr. Zhivago. Okay, anyways, here's just a magnificent Renaissance painting by Sandro Botticelli. Him and Rogier van der Weyden were the two best painting artists of the 1400s. But, it took mankind a long time to get to this point, okay? This is a heck of a lot better than the cave drawings many, many thousands of years ago. It took mankind time to get to this point. We should learn from our past and cherish it and build on it, not throw it in the garbage can. And marriage, we should do what we can in society to help marriages to work. Right now, divorce is too unfair, and it just turns the man into a slave. And because of that, men don't want to get married. And because men don't want to get married, and because there's so many divorces, you got tons of kids growing up without a father in the house. And children grow up better when there's a father in the house. They get different things from the mother and the father. The mom gives unconditional love, typically. The father is a little more demanding of the kids to work harder, okay? And that's good for kids to see two different perspectives. And a healthy society should celebrate the family. Celebrate the birth of a child in the family. Because if a society doesn't celebrate the family, then it's not going to have good families, and it's going to fall apart, which is what's happening to the United States right now. Should be celebrating, the birth of a child and, Christmas. It's a wonderful time, and everybody's welcome at Christmas, and it's a joyous time. Okay, again, here's another magnificent picture. Look how energized Christianity is to make all this beautiful art. Okay, this is Madonna Magnificat, again by Sandro Botticelli. It's just beautiful. Everything about it's just good and kind and right and warm and loving. It's beautiful. Okay, and here's an example of a family. This one is called Christ in the House of His Parents by John Everett Millais from 1850. Millais is one of the great painters in the group from the 1800s in England called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And John Ruskin, I'll have a picture of him coming up in a moment, he really helped the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood to become better known in England, which was a good thing because, in the past I used to think that, most English, they stink at art, and Protestant chapels, they stink. They're real boring inside and stuff. But the Pre-Raphaelites, man, they were fantastic. Their idea was to go back to the time before Raphael in terms of their commitment to the sort of naturalness, warmth, and sincerity of their art. They felt that Raphael, in their opinion, was sort of moving away from the religious component of art and that they were going to go back towards it. Here's a painting called Filial Piety or The Paralytic by Jean-Baptiste Greuze, 1763. And the reason I show it is just the idea that here's this poor old guy, he's paralyzed, and what's keeping him alive is the love of his family, okay? Everybody goes through up and down times and needs social support and family support, and so, loving, warm families that help each other, they make life better for everybody. And sometimes people don't realize that, when you're young and healthy, you might not think you need your family so much, but you get a little older, you get lonely, or you get sick or something, boy, you'd be glad you got a family and you help each other. So a healthy society should have, it should honor the family. Look at the Ten Commandments, honor thy father, honor thy mother. There's a good reason for that. Okay, John Ruskin, he was painted here by Millais, the same artist from earlier. And this guy, yes, if you really studied him, you will know who he is. He is a heroic genius who helped to usher in a type of renaissance in England in the 1800s. And if you also know more about him, he's also kind of pathetic and he's kind of sad. And that's kind of typical of a genius, that they're incredible in a few ways and then they're kind of pathetic and sad in other ways. But he was a great man, Ruskin. And if you really want to understand 1800s in England, what was good about it, and the Oxford movement, the architectural revival with Augustus Welby Pugin, the writing of Charles Dickens, then Ruskin's right in the center of all that. He was a professor for Oscar Wilde, Oxford professor. It's an interesting story. Okay, kids grow up praying. They grow up a lot nicer, okay? They're not going to be perfect. It doesn't mean they're going to become saints or angels, but they grow up better when they've got that than when they don't have that. Okay, here's a picture of Isaac Newton in 1665, Anno Mirabilis, the miracle year, when he went to the family cottage in Woolsthorpe and just worked on his ideas. Here he is looking at the apple, thinking about gravity, and he, made more discoveries in that 1 year. Like, he's the greatest scientist of all time. He discovered and invented calculus, figured out gravity, figured out the physics of optics and, movement and thermodynamics. Just amazing. And he's like the most religious guy you'll ever have. So whenever you hear people say, oh, religious people are stupid, yeah, right, okay? Oscar Wilde was actually pretty religious too, but Isaac Newton, super religious. Take a look at James Tour, the genius guy, how religious he is. And I can tell you, I know from my experience, Christianity energizes me. It by believing that your life has meaning and you have a purpose and God wants you to be a good person and excel in some area, it gives you energy. And you need energy to achieve anything. I mean, the biggest challenge to learning things a lot of times is just motivating yourself to do it. And then here's a picture from Norman Rockwell of freedom of speech. And a society needs freedom of speech because you have to work towards the truth and be able to say things that you're not sure about, and listen to constructive criticism from others to try to figure out what is correct, what is best. And what you tend to have in tyrannical societies is no one is allowed to have an opinion or they get in trouble. And so nobody talks. And then a lot of times the established opinion is wrong, so everybody will be stuck under something that is wrong, and it just goes to crap. Like I said, look at Egypt. They had for like 1,000 years, they weren't allowed to change the style of art, so nothing new or interesting could be produced, okay? They had things like that in communist Russia in the 1900s too. Scientists would get punished for not agreeing with what the party members say, and the party member wouldn't know his head from his ass, and he'd be totally wrong on a science, and it really set their country back for their scientific research. Okay, here's a painting that I think is pretty interesting. It's called Lost by August Friedrich Schenk from 1873, and the gist of it is basically big snowstorm blizzard and all the sheep are lost, and basically the wolves are out in the periphery going to pick them off and kill them all. The dogs will protect them a little bit, but they can only do so much. The shepherd is saying, rally to the cross, let us come here together and help each other so we can protect each other to some extent and be safe, and hopefully all of us can survive and we can have a happy life and the weather will be better tomorrow or sometime soon. And that's kind of a little bit like what America's like in now. We can all work together, get along, everybody could be happy, things could be good. But we got to help each other. We got to do whatever is necessary to sort of make it so it works for everybody. And hopefully we'll get to that point. And so here's basically it. Society through the university system has rejected Christ and Christianity, but it doesn't have any good replacement. Where are our ethics going to come from? Atheistic Darwinism that says everybody's a talking monkey primate, farm animal? That's not going to lead to good ethics. Name another system in place that has the ability to become the way of looking at things. I only see two competing paradigms. Atheistic Darwinism becoming communism, and that's dominating now, and it's growing and growing and growing. And there's big money behind it, versus I see Christian ethics sort of slowly fading and fading. And then there's plenty of other cultures and good people from all over the world and different societies and religions, but they don't have that big of a presence in American society. They just don't, okay? Buddhism, some people might like that, fine, but it's, largely a godless religion. And even though there's a lot of very good people in it, it has no ability to stand up to atheistic Darwinism and prevent communism. It just doesn't, okay? There's a lot of very religious people and other things, but they don't have enough persons or enough whatever to change the path of atheistic Darwinism. Christianity could restore Christian ethics if Christians were really Christian, but most of them are not. Most of them sort of had Christian parents but don't really do much with the church or haven't really read much Bible, so they don't really know that much. But all I'm saying is, Christianity is not perfect. It's got tons of problems, okay? Tons of problems. But it's also got tons of good things about it. And it creates an ethic where everybody's welcome, everybody can get along, people can forgive each other, and people can live together and be happy. So let's hope that America could restore that and things will be good. This is the picture of Christ knocking on the door, and it's up to the person whether or not they answer. It's up to them. Okay, there's no door, there's no handle on the outside. He's not going to open the door. They have to open it up. And hopefully we can all be better off. I hope so.